Get going. So, yeah, other people will join us. So, as we know, welcome everyone to the last session of the ITRC Community of Practice for this year. And there we go. As before, I want to thank, and for the last time, actually, this time around, I want to thank our co-sponsors, especially the American Public Health Association for the CE credits and for allowing Neely to participate as an intern to CTIP, and Jesse for hosting this, to Trauma Informed Oregon and allowing Christy to be our intern here, and to all the other co-sponsors that we have for this program. Today, we're going to focus on the last or the fifth of the foundational areas that our research has found is really going to be essential to help people prevent and heal climate traumas, and that is establishing ongoing opportunities for residents to heal their trauma. And then we're going to talk about moving to action and next steps. And I'm very honored to have Reverend Paul Abernathy, who's the CEO of the Neighborhood Resilience Project, join us today. I am always just inspired as can be every time I hear Reverend Paul speak. So before we get going, let's start with a short resilience pause. And again, as we did last week, just choose any skill you would like to use, saying soft to yourself as you breathe in, breath as you breathe out, resourcing, thinking of things that help you calm yourself, tracking your physical sensations, grounding yourself, feeling supported by something solid, 6-second breathings, breathing in for 4 seconds and then counting into 6 as you breathe out, hand on belly, breathing, or any other skill that resonates, that you make sense. And we'll just take a second to do that. And as you practice that skill, I just want you to sort of also think about a purposing skill. That is, so imagine that a major storm seriously damages your community, leaving you and your family and other residents without sufficient food, water, power, etc. for a week. What values would you want to live your life by during and after that event? How would you want to live? And how can you ensure that you live out those values? What can you do to sort of stay with that? So continue to practice your presencing skill, and just, if you want to, if you're willing, just give some thought to that. Okay, and if you have any thoughts, reactions that you'd like to share, please feel free to share that in chat. Let's do our one last breakout room. Then together we'll do groups of 4 or 5. I don't know if it's Christy or Neely who's going to organize you in that, but and just for 10 minutes, how do you feel now? What you took away from last week's session on practicing forgiveness in the community and other practices, and or the community practice in general, and how has this influenced your work or your life? And what do you still want to know? So we'll just take 10 minutes to reconnect, settle in, ground ourselves in this, and then we'll come back to the group and hear from Reverend Abernathy. So Christy.
It's like, like elementary school,
Yeah.
Just
Let's make believe what we want. Welcome back, everyone. I think everybody's back now. Does anybody
have very worrying, Bob, when the first thing I hear is you saying, let's not deal with reality here.
Well, this
For
whole
those that
community of
see-
practice does not deal with reality. So, you know,
Yeah.
right?
For those that see that part on the recording or now, like the entire conversation was about the opposite of that. And then you just heard the sarcastic part
Right.
of the wrap up at the end,
Yeah.
just to confirm that we are very
Yeah.
much dealing with reality and possibilities that do exist in the universe.
So speaking of realities, if anybody has any comments you'd like to add, anything that you want to share in chat from your conversation, please do so. And then if we see some, we'll read them out. But let me now sort of give set us up for hearing from Father Paul here. We have talked about 5 foundational areas that community groups need to focus on to build the capacity for mental wellness and transformational resilience for this long climate emergency, which is reality. One is to build strong social connections across boundaries in the community. A second is to engage in a just transition by creating supportive physical built, economic, ecological conditions. The third was to develop mental wellness and resilience literacy. Last week, we focused on engaging residents in practices that promote mental wellness and resilience. In this session, we're going to focus on establishing ongoing opportunities for residents to heal their suffering and trauma. So I just want to ask you a question to get into this briefly. Think back to a time when you felt very distressed or hopeless or were truly traumatized. If you found a way to heal, what were the most important elements? How did that come about? And if you're willing, just share your thoughts in chat about that. And Christy, if you can see them and if there's any comments that come up, just read a few, if you would.
Okay.
Or Neely, doesn't matter.
Becky just posted community helped people who had similar experiences. Lola said sharing with others, community solidarity. Vivian says connections. Joyce says supportive relationships, walking in nature. And Mark actually showed an article about trauma. And Deb says breaking it down to the very next step.
Great, good, okay, perfect. So all of you are very well grounded in what this involves. Whoops, what is that? There's something weird here. So, all right, let me get out of that. So, something's happening with this, and I'm not going to worry about it for now. So, the climate crisis is really going to cause millions of people to experience anxiety, depression, grief, hopelessness, and many other kinds of psychological and emotional distresses. And for most of the people, it's important to realize that these are not going to be symptoms of pathology, psychopathology. They're going to be normal reactions to dysfunctional and often frightening external conditions. So rather than pathologizing people, it's going to be really important for community groups to really help them understand that their distress is perfectly natural, given what they're experiencing, that is, normalize it, and that their thoughts and behaviors, which might seem not very helpful, they are instinctual coping mechanisms that might have gone awry. And helping people to engage in those other 4 foundational areas that we talked about will help many people heal themselves, self-heal, developing strong social connections with others, etc. Yet there's still going to be millions of people that are going to be traumatized, and they're going to need help to healing. And healing can be difficult because traumatized people often feel hopeless because they don't feel they have any control over their lives. And they consequently don't understand what they're experiencing or how to deal with it. And often all they can do is attend to their basic needs, finding food, shelter, enough money, etc., whatever it might be. And sometimes the coping mechanisms they originally adopted that seemed to make sense at the time no longer make sense and go awry. And this is why it's so important for resilience groups to take the lead in establishing ongoing healing opportunities. Judith Herman, many of you know very well, describes 3 core stages of healing: safety, acknowledgement, and reconnection. People often cannot heal until they feel physically and emotionally safe and supported. And individual and community support, as many of you just described in your comments in chat, which means meaningful social relationships and provision of key resources, are really therefore essential for the healing process. And when people feel safe and supported, they can begin to acknowledge what they are experiencing and share it with others, which begins to release their trauma. And this can lead them to reconnect with themselves and with others, and helps people learn how to manage the distress. That doesn't mean the distress is going away, it just means they learn how to manage it in a way that allows them to regain control over their lives. And engaging in pro-social activities, helping others or helping nature, is a very powerful, perhaps the most powerful way to do that. And with that background, I would like to introduce Reverend Paul Abernathy to you all. Again, CEO of the Neighborhood Resilience Project. And Father Abernathy, it's all yours.
Right. All right, Bob, thank you so much for the introduction. It's so good to be here with all of you here today on this very important topic. And I want to introduce a concept today of trauma-informed community development. As Bob mentioned, Father Paul Abernathy, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Neighborhood Resilience Project, and we've been looking at this issue of community trauma for really years now. And not only the existence of community trauma, but really what we must do about it, how we get from what we call trauma-affected community to resilient, healing, and healthy community. What does that process look like? If we really are going to confront the realities of climate change and also the impact of climate change, we should consider how important it is that we begin working towards resilient, healing, and healthy communities now, because it only becomes more complex as the years go on. I want to begin by this reflection on community development, because oftentimes I've learned in my work in community, people have a very narrow view of what community development is. A lot of times, especially from an American perspective, when people are talking about community development, they're talking in many instances about real estate and jobs, Now, that becomes very misleading. I think there are many other countries in the world that do a much better job than the United States is having a more comprehensive understanding what exactly development is. And if we really think about what development executed on a community level looks like, we should consider the wide array of factors that complicates the possibility of developing communities in a good way. So I want to begin with this reflection of community development and really define this. And of course, the United Nations really has, I believe, a very strong definition of community development. And here you'll see that it first and foremost is a process. So really beginning to think about our communities and climate change, we have to think about how we're preparing for the future. The question becomes, what is our process? Because we have to develop our communities. We mustn't assume that our communities are going to have what our communities need as the crisis escalates. It must be intentionally developed. But then the question becomes, what is the process by which we do that? You see, it's a process when community members come together to take collective action and generate solutions to common problems. If we don't have a process that enables community members to come together, and really when we think about this, the question becomes, how are we engaging people? How are we building a culture in this process that makes participating feasible, that makes participating attractive, that encourages and continues to foster participation? How do we with this process, create the kind of environment that enables collective action, not just the action of a series of individuals, but collective actions. How do we really facilitate a process where this collective action generates solutions to common problems? And here's the thing about common problems. When we say common problems, we're going to say we all agree on what the problem is. Common problems. That means that there has to be a process by which we problematize issues. A lot of times communities don't make progress because they're trying to solve issues. And one thing that's absolutely certain is that issues don't have solutions. Problems do. So the reality is that we have to learn how to problematize issues. That's a process. So really thinking about what is that process in which we were really engaging community members, we're bringing them together, we're creating this environment that creates cohesion, that encourages participation. We are helping problematize issues so that there's a common understanding of what the problem is. And then and only then can we have collective action to address those problems. You will then see the second bullet point, that community well-being, economic, social, health, environmental, and cultural, often evolves from this type of collection action being taken at a grassroots level. So here's what we can say, that if the community development, if we were to say, what is the purpose of community development? We must say very simply, the purpose of community development, the goal of community development is community well-being. That has to be the foundation for our view on this. We're thinking about climate change impacting community. We have to think about community development as it relates to that emerging challenge. And that community development, the goal of community development is community well-being. And that has to be very comprehensive in how we understand that. Yes, we have to take a look at real estate. Yes, we have to take a look at economic health, of course. But you see here, environmental factors. We have to look at health, social factors, even cultural factors. And we're going to really get into that, some of the challenges around engaging communities, and even how climate change can really be exacerbated even in certain communities as it relates to their experience of historical trauma. We're going to talk in just a moment. But the only other thing I want to emphasize about this definition is that it does presume that this collective action is being taken at the grassroots level. And this is a very important point that we've learned with our work, because a lot of times we really want to focus on policy, and policy is of utmost importance. We know this, and yet we also know that policy, just focusing on policy, does not take away from the necessity of grassroots level action, especially in some of our communities that really are marginalized. Policy affects different communities in different ways. If a community has been historically marginalized, they won't react to policy the same way. This is what we've learned in our work, because they don't participate in the political process the same way. So that the level of grassroots level engagement has to be a priority everywhere, but certainly in communities that are historically marginalized communities. Just to reiterate, community development is well-being. So then, if we're talking about sustainability, if we're talking about creating opportunities, we're talking about confronting the possibility of climate change. Can you imagine this? If we are asking people to prepare themselves for the inevitability of the challenges that relate to climate change, but people are not healthy. I think this is one of the key learnings in our work, is that it's not just about creating opportunities. It's not just about focusing on sustainability, but it's really about asking, are people healthy enough to sustain opportunity? If you look at COVID-19, it's very important to understand this. COVID-19 affected the entire world, and it is also just as true that it did not affect the entire world the same way. If you look at death and hospitalization rates, we know that death and hospitalization rates were higher in some communities than others. They were 2 to 3 times higher in Black communities, two times higher in Hispanic communities in the United States, for example. These communities, this is important to understand, that when there is a crisis, it's a global crisis perhaps, it does impact everybody, but there are some communities that it's going to impact more severely than others, because of historical factors that have eroded resilience. because of historical trauma that has created a culture that continues to perpetuate trauma. Because the roots, the results of this perpetuated historical trauma are now people who themselves do not have good health. It is, we need to think about when COVID-19 really struck the globe, and many of us perhaps know people that were in this situation. There were people who, when COVID-19 came, who had cancer. There were people who already had asthma. There were people who already had COPD, and the list goes on and on. So we have to consider that in our work as it pertains to climate change, we mustn't understand the impact of climate change on every community the same way. There are some communities in which the impact is going to be more severe more quickly. The question becomes, in those communities, how do we help people become healthy enough to sustain opportunity? When we look at this work on a community level, it's very important to consider what are individual risk factors. So some of the research around these risk factors that you see here, CDC specifically pertain to violence, but they, I believe, are relevant no matter what really the crisis, no matter what really the public health challenge is. These risk factors undermine a community's chance to be resilient in the face of crisis. I believe this absolutely includes climate change. So clearly you will see that there's parental challenges, parental, lack of understanding of a child's needs, the history of maltreatment in family of origin, certainly substance abuse and mental health issues. We're talking about depression in families. We're talking about parental characteristics at a young age, such as low education, single parenthood. If you have some communities that have a disproportionately high number of young, lowly educated single parents, that community has really, that has an elevated risk. There's an elevated risk level in those communities. We know this according to research. And even a large number of dependent children who are low income. And of course, this is another factor. There are another risk factor. There are many communities in which non-biological transient caregivers in the home also can be a risk factor. So we know this. If there's some communities in which you have homes in which maybe a mother has a boyfriend that she's taken in, they're now living together, but that boyfriend is not the biological father, for example, of the children living in the home, the research says that that can certainly be a risk factor. And of course, parental thoughts and emotions that tend to support or justify maltreatment behaviors. Now, this last one is very much rooted in historical trauma. There are many parenting styles that really can be rooted in historical trauma. Of course, there are family risk factors, such as social isolation. Families might be themselves completely disconnected from the community in which they see themselves. Can you imagine when if there is a natural disaster as a result of climate change, and everybody living in this geographical area feels completely isolated from their neighbor? This is a real problem. Family disorganization, dissolution, violence, intimate partner violence. Again, in time of crisis, this becomes exacerbated. And of course, parenting stress, poor parent-child relationships, negative interactions between parents and children. This all undermines community resilience. Of course, in community risk factors, community violence and concentrated neighborhood disadvantage. So as well as poor social connections. This second point is very significant. Concentrated neighborhood disadvantage. And this is what I'm talking about. If we really talk about climate change and the impact that it has, we understand it's not impacting every community the same way. We understand here that concentrated neighborhood disadvantage really sets communities up for failure. We might take Hurricane Katrina, for example, in the United States back in 2004, and we might see in this example what really the impact of a natural disaster on a disadvantaged community really looks like, where people don't have the ability to get out, people don't have the social networks to really support their evacuation, and many died unnecessarily in that crisis. And we think about climate change, we have to consider these risk factors. If this is the case, we have to understand how then to emphasize protective factors. So when we think about this in community, we really should be thinking along these two lines. What are the risk factors? What are the protective factors? In time of crisis, it's going to be the protective factors that help really get that community across the finish line. You can see some examples of protective factors: adequate housing, access to healthcare, social services, caring adults outside the family, stable family relationships, and social networks. These are examples of family protective factors. And of course, communities that support parents take responsibility for preventing abuse. The CDC is saying in their research that communities, that whenever we foster that strong parenting, it really does a great deal to build resilience in children that eventually become adults. Okay, so really thinking about this on a community level. Just to reference historical trauma, it is important to understand that there are many communities that really have this experience of trauma, not just in one generation, but over many generations. And what happens is it results in a culture that's informed first and foremost by trauma, wherein the cultural norms of the community become unhealthy lifestyles. That is to say that the shared experience of suffering is that suffering is so widespread that it becomes the trauma is so widespread that it becomes the thing that serves as the foundation for the community's worldview. And so you begin to say, what is possible in the face of climate change? In communities that have a disproportionate experience of trauma, people may say not much, because they've already resigned themselves even to a culture of death. How many people die of uncharacteristically early age in these communities where there is this disproportionate experience of trauma? So when we talk about how we're going to be doing that planning to really prepare for the future of climate change in this particular kind of community, it becomes very challenging, because people are thinking about the violence that's happening today. They're not really thinking, they don't really have the capacity to think about the impact of climate change 5 or 10 years from now, or even a generation from now. So really thinking about trauma affected community as a concept, that is to say communities that are disproportionately impacted by trauma, so much so that trauma becomes the foundation for the community's worldview. And in our final minute here today, just to reflect on what then do we do? Going back to how we began with the process of community development, we think about how that process is trauma informed. That is to say, we need to establish that we need to, for ourselves as this process, establish a framework that establishes and promotes resilient, healing, and healthy communities so that people can be healthy enough to sustain opportunity and realize their potential. It's not just community development, but we have to do this in a trauma-informed way. And what that results in is community resilience, which is the measure of sustainability of a community to utilize available resources to respond to, withstand, recover from adverse situations, okay? I just want to end with these things. This is the Post-Carbon Institute, and then who says these are the 6 foundations of community resilience. People who have the power to envision the future of the community. We need to help people vision. What is the exercise by which we envision the future? Systems thinking. There are many people who, because of the weight of their trauma, don't have the ability to think in terms of systems, to think how one system can be leveraged with another system to make change. Adaptability. A community that can adapt is resilient. We have to adapt in the face of change. If communities are really stricken with trauma, it inhibits their ability to adapt to change in the face of crisis. We have to develop that. Transformability, that is to say that being able to take a challenge and transform it into an opportunity is a key skill that we have to be able to instill in these communities as we prepare them for climate change. Sustainability. It's not only what we do now, but it's really about what we as a community can do in future generations. Always mindful of the 7th generation principle, which came from the Iroquois Confederation, which said that these tribes would not make any decision without considering how this impacted 7 generations from now. This is sustainable thinking. And this is what we have to build in these communities. And finally, courage. We need to celebrate courage. We need to foster courage. We need to raise up examples of courage to inspire more courage. So with that, I just wanted to again, thank you all for the opportunity to be with you. I know that we've covered a great deal of material in a short period of time, but I will say that no matter how significant the challenges before us, there is so much that we can do to build our communities up. And I look forward to celebrating the many successes that you all will no doubt have in the weeks, months, and years to come as you work to save valuable lives in our community. And with that, Bob, I'm grateful for the time.
Thank you, Father Paul, so much for, as usual, your wonderful presentation and just being who you are and the way you present this information. We're going to take some questions now, and if you can put those in chat, that would be very helpful. But I would like to start by just asking you to, if you would, just describe how you enter the community, how you engage with community, sort of walk people through the process to know how these principles are applied.
Yeah, that's a great question. So how we do it and how we prepare people to do it is very important. We prepare people to serve as what we call behavioral health community organizers. So this is different than the kind of community organizers that many of us are really used to. In traditional community organizing, sort of the Saul Alinsky style of organizing, it's really meant in many ways to help align interests towards a common political objective. What we're talking about is something much more extensive than that. If we're talking about healing community, if we're talking about building resilience in community, it's much more complex than that. So we have what we call behavioral health community organizers who are trained to facilitate community level intervention. And that really becomes key because a lot of times when we think of interventions, we have a tendency to think of interventions on a more individual basis, but there really can be community level interventions. And it really becomes an understanding of social networks, an understanding of how to engage key leverage points at the same time, how to really understand with data where the best place to execute this kind of, to begin a community level intervention is. These kind of key data points that inform the engagement that's done in a trauma-informed way that has as its goal, the establishment of a resilient, healing, and healthy community. Now, I will say that there are key interventions that can be done over the course of a long-term community-based intervention, both on an individual and a collective basis. That all becomes part of the training. It becomes all the skill set, and how it's directed is according to certainly what we've learned in this work. The final point I'd say on that is that I also believe very strongly that you can measure the impact of these kind of community-wide interventions. And that's what we've been able to do in our work, is to really measure the impact of this on health and well-being, not only for the individual, but also on a community level. And I believe that that you really work towards what you measure, that becomes very important. Having the ability to measure health and well-being on a community level, it really helps direct resources. It helps direct intervention. If that's the measure that people are paying attention to, can you imagine if we had a resilience score for every community? And we said, look, there's going to be our collective objective to move this resilience, to improve this resilience score. It would change the nature of investment and development in our communities. So we believe not only that you can, but that once you do measure the impact of this, that it does impact the way in which people execute intervention at the community level.
Thank you very much. I see a couple of questions. I'll follow with the first one first, and then we'll go to the last one first, and then the first one. What metrics do you use to measure, and what processes or surveys? And if you can share, but also if there's anything you can just send to us that we can post and so everybody can see it down the road, that would be great.
Yeah, I can send a little video. We've designed a health assessment system. It's actually called I Am Healthy. And the reason why, in partnership with the University of Pittsburgh, and the reason why we did this is that in our research, what we found was there's a lot of different assessments out there. But what we were really looking at is how we do two things, how we have an integrated understanding of health, well-being, and resilience. So a lot of times assessments will really focus on one area. It might be mental health. It might be sort of like socioeconomic. It might be whatever the case might be. But what we wanted to know is what was an integrated understanding of health, well-being, and resilience. And the second thing was how we understood that not only by the person, but how the health, well-being, and resilience of a person also impacted the health, well-being, and resilience of a community. And that's why we really embarked on this pretty extensive sort of research project that happened over the course of years with the University of Pittsburgh to develop this health assessment system. And the thing that I would say is we also in our work, we use it as an app. And here's what the power of that is, because knowledge is power in many respects. And one of the things that becomes very evident as we use, for example, the RAND Corporation, like we've used the RAND Corporation in our community. Obviously, they do phenomenal research. But what often happens is there's such a tremendous disconnect between that research, between even the data and the people who that data was collected with. If we're able to figure out how to use technology that enables the average community member to become an analyst, we're really getting somewhere. You know, it's one thing if someone is saying, hey, you know, climate change is making this big impact, we have to work on resilience, and Professor so-and-so says this. But if we have the technology where community members are saying, look, we've done this assessment, this is what we've learned from it, we have to change things. It changes the, it sort of becomes an exhortation in a community level that's extremely valuable. So that's what we've learned. Yes, there is an app. There is an app. Yes, I am healthy indeed. And then, Bob, there was another question, I think, so we just keep going.
Sure. There's one up, but the first one was, how do we balance empowering and problematizing in our communities?
This is a wonderful question. So the real key is, you know, I think the World Health Organization has really figured out how to do this in a very effective way. And that's with a sort of consultative workshop methodology. And what the key is is that we have to figure out how to introduce information to people and facilitate conversation. So those are the two skills that you have to have. How, you know, it's not just knowing the information, but how do you introduce information to a particular community, and how then do you facilitate conversation about that information? Because if you can effectively, and here's in thinking about who really the expert is, right? Because the expert doesn't always have to be the PhD. It can be, and isn't it wonderful if it is? But really, an expert is somebody who knows the information and can deliver it. That's what really we mean. Someone who knows the information well and can deliver it. We have to think in terms of micro presentations in a community setting, micro presentations that are culturally appropriate. If we can understand micro presentations, I'm talking 10 minutes, really, 10-minute presentations. And even if we think about how we're creating a narrative, what is the arc of that narrative over a series of 10-minute presentations, each of which is followed by essentially focus groups, breakout groups that are facilitated, not just by somebody who's available that day to take notes, but someone who's a trained facilitator. And if the information is collected, if it's structured in such a way in which the information is collected becomes then the foundation for a community plan, it gives people then ownership of the emerging plan. But just the third time, I'll say it one more time, the ability to deliver, to deliver information and to facilitate a discussion on that information. Those are the two skill sets that you must have in a community level in order to be successful here, I believe.
Wonderful. Let me just follow up on that one more time and go a little further. So you train these residents in these skills or these people. how do they engage the community? What are the first couple steps that they take? First couple actions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it begins with, we refer to it as a probing phase. And in the probing phase, so even to take one step back, whenever we train these behavioral community organizers, they're always beginning with some base level of knowledge of the community. That's absolutely critical. Because there's going to be things that they know and understand in relationships that they have that can be leveraged eventually. Having said that, they really begin what we call really a probing phase. And that could be really door knocking, really door knocking. And that's what we're talking about. Now, the thing is that in the early phases of this, it's not door knocking to introduce a particular agenda. It's not door knocking to introduce a particular strategy or trying to sell a particular intervention. This door knocking is in an attempt to, this is what's really fascinating, is to identify resilience. That's what their objective is. So they're going out, and we understand that people, right? People are resilient. They're going out and they're trying to find people who they can see have recognizable resilience, who are nested in community, who they themselves can become champions of a broader community-based intervention. So that's what they're doing. They're actually probing the community, searching for people who have resilience. The question then becomes, are they able to, how effectively can they engage those people and then enlist them in the intervention? And if they become the early adopters, they then are enlisted to help catalyze community-based interventions. So just to be very clear, what are they doing on their door knocking? They're trying to identify people who have demonstrated resilience. And then they're trying to recruit those people. They're trying to enlist those people to catalyze the community level intervention. So that's all relationship building. That's all making believers of them. It's making them believe that some kind of change is possible. And what's really interesting about those kinds of engagements is there usually presents itself an opportunity to demonstrate to these community, these community members who have, these resilient community members. There's usually an opportunity to demonstrate that we're serious about what we're doing. If we're able to make like a very small investment, it might be a new door, might be cleaning trash up out of a back alley. It might be something really simple, but something, we say in this work, we people talk about trustworthiness. We talk about demonstrated trustworthiness. I remember there was this one woman in the early days of this work. She was very resilient, very respected in the community, and she said to me, "Oh, you're here to help. That's really great. I think it would be really wonderful if you did. And since you're here to help, I have a niece who has 4 children and none of them have beds." Now, here's what I understood. I understood that I should probably get them beds because, here's the thing. We're going to talk about climate change, right? And it's important, obviously. It's critical. And if they're sleeping on the floor, they're going to have a hard time talking about climate change. If we can address, however, them sleeping on the floor, it opens up the possibility to talk about climate change. That was key. And let me tell you something, that woman, our greatest champion, she's going around, she's like, I don't know. I don't even think she understand fully what we were doing, but to her, it didn't matter because what she knew is that if you engage with these people, your life will be better. And that's the goal. If you were to ask me, what should people understand? What should you help people understand? If they, at the end of the day, say to themselves, if I engage with this person, my life's going to be better, then you have achieved your goal. That's becomes the work of these behavioral community organizers. They're engaging with these people, and the result of that engagement should be, if I engage with this person, with these people, my life's going to be better, and sort of build the network of champions in that respect. I hope I answered your question, Bob. I don't always answer that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can now see, and I know you offer healthcare to folks and assist with health issues and others kinds of things. We actually help them with their issues they're struggling with, and then they're, like you said, they're more able to be interested in other things.
That's right.
And until that time, they're not. How can you?
Right.
You know. Well, thank you so much, Father Paul. If everybody on the line, you can find more information on the Neighborhood Resilient Project website. Father Paul, if you can send the slides, if you're willing, and we'll
Sure.
post them. Any link, the app you have also, we will make that available to everybody. And we're going to say this at the end of the session, but I'll say it again now. It'll go on we have a base camp site for everybody participating in this there's actually 60 people all told that will get it. But it's also going on the CTIP site. There's a page on the CTIP website that has all this information that's going to be available to anybody. So if that's okay with you, that's all going to be out there. So and Christy just posted that web page on the CTIP site. So well, thank you very much again. We really appreciate you taking the time to make this presentation and for all the great work you're doing there in Pittsburgh and elsewhere. So,
Bob, thank you. It's always an honor for the invitation, and to all the rest of you, what an honor it is to be with you. I certainly wish you all the best. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And we're now going to do a short resilience pause just to settle in for a second and let Father Paul's information settle with you just a little bit. Use whatever skill you'd like. And now let's do a short breakout rooms. We're going to come back and then have group discussions about how to get going and next steps, et cetera. But let's just take a short breakout rooms of 3 to 5 people just to share what you gained from Father Abernathy's presentation. Can you see doing something similar in your neighborhood, your community, your organization? Any key questions you have? So Christy, if you could break up folks, and then we'll come back and have about an hour to a little less than an hour to sort of discuss next steps and how to engage. And so does that mean everybody's back? Yeah, great, welcome back everyone. Would anybody like to share anything that came up in particular, any particular points, questions, issues in your discussions in your breakout rooms? Christy, if you see a hand, let people know that. Okay, it doesn't look like anybody came up. All right, then I would like to just do a little bit, talk a little bit more, and then we're going to go on and have another large group discussion. There are, Father Abernathy's program is just really one of the most inspirational community-based initiatives that I know of, and I hope you can look more into it. There's other ways to help people heal in communities, and I just wanted to share these other ways, and there's actually even more than this. But one of the most important, I think, for the climate emergency is going to be healing circles and other community and group-based healing methods. And one of the great ones that's really emerging is the Visible Hands Collaborative. I would encourage you all to look at that. They're actually run by Ken Thompson, who was going to join us today, but is not here. And they're also organized in Pittsburgh, but it's based on work done in Brazil, in the favelas of Brazil that help low-income people gather together in a healing circle. There's also, and really share their distress and support each other. There's Community Healing Network. There's a National Compadres Network, which works with indigenous populations. There's the Healing Circles Global. You can get on their website. They do online healing circles. So that's really going to be vital to establish ongoing healing circles. But you have to, as Father Paul said, talk to the people in your community, get to know them, to figure out what kind of healing resonates with them. What are people willing to do? There's also somatic healing. There's expressive therapies, art, drama, music, dance, etc. There's mindfulness-based healing that will attract certain populations. There's spiritual healings. I think that's going to be so important to remind ourselves that people need to tap into a religious background base or just spiritual healing. Nature-based animal healing are all going to be important, and others. Clinical therapies, as you see down there, will remain very important. But as the climate emergency accelerates, it can't be the dominant approach. There's simply not enough therapists to go around. They're located mostly in wealthier urban and suburban areas, not in rural areas or low-income communities, and people don't have the funds to pay for it, et cetera. So, but for people who, even after engaging in these other 5 foundational areas that we've talked about, still cannot function or at risk of harming themselves or others, the clinical treatment is still going to be important. And then the other one up in the upper left-hand corner is going to be very important: memorial events and rituals. This is really, really important to help communities heal. And that means sometimes they're done sort of spontaneously, sometimes it requires planning, but bringing the community together to memorialize something that's just happened. And to do that on a regular basis. And people share their distress, but also these memorial events often bring people together and get them jazzed up and motivated to begin to engage in solutions. So that's really going to be very, very important. All of these kinds of healing mechanisms. And again, the community groups that are working on this should go out and figure out what kind of approach resonates with the members of the community, and see if you can establish these on a regular basis. So you establish a small healing circle and in schools or in other places, see how it goes, and then you'll learn and you can expand it from there. So I want to do a brief recap now, and then we're just going to talk about next steps. We've talked about the fact, and you just heard from Father Abernathy very clearly, that to prevent and heal the distresses and traumas coming our way due to the climate emergency, we got to address the multiple interacting individual, family, social, economic, physical, built, and ecological factors. We can't just focus on the individual or the individual and the family. And addressing these multi-systemic factors requires a public health approach to mental wellness and resilience. And that's what Father Abernathy just talked about. We need to focus on the entire population, but we must give special attention to those who are high risk or don't have that capacity to care for themselves, or not very resilient, or who show symptoms of pathology. But our mantra must be, leave no one behind. And we must focus on preventing problems before they occur, not merely reacting to them after they emerge, and to integrating the healing into the prevention strategies. So if you engage people in healing circles, they're going to learn skills that can help them prevent future problems. So prevention first. We want to really do that by, as Father Abernathy talked about, strengthening protective factors, understanding what those protective factors are in communities, and strengthening those as you would deal with the risk factors. So we've got to build strength, resources, and skills. And research shows unequivocally, really, that the most effective way to deal with widespread mental health and psychosocial spiritual problems is to create the social infrastructure in communities. We've called it a resilience coordinating coalition. You can call it whatever you want, that engages a broad and diverse array of neighborhood residents, civic groups, et cetera, in planning, implementing, and continually improving actions that deal with that. Here's the ideal situation. To do that, this is what we call the Resilience Coordinating Coalition, but it's really well-coordinated decentralization. It's a ring team or hub and spoke approach where you've got a steering committee together, but they're sort of working very closely with groups that are working with different populations in the communities and figuring out what where to start, how to help them build their resilience, et cetera. And you come back and you share what you're doing. And the 5 foundational areas we've talked about are, again, building social connections across boundaries in the community. That's one thing that Neighborhood Resilience Project's really focused on. And I just wanted to share some recent articles. There's one in September about this, a new report by Crew that we've worked with, report saying that the importance of building social connections for climate resilience is really important. Engage people in a just transition by helping them address and creating equitable, safe, and healthy physical built, economic, and ecological conditions. And the UN just a week ago issued a report that a just transition policies are really needed, and they can create 20 million new jobs. And then thirdly, build that universal literacy about mental wellness resilience. Help everybody understand what's happening within them when they feel severely stressed, and learning presencing and purposing skills. And the Guardian in the UK, which actually has some of the best articles and news about climate change, had one in September, said humanity's moment, how we can find meaning in a world that is at once both heaven and hell. And it's really about purposing. And then, as we talked about last week, you want to engage residents in specific kinds of practices. Again, it's going to be tailored to the community and to the population, those practices that really enhance their capacity for mental wellness and resilience. And Time, just a year ago, had a really great article on how gratitude can help combat climate change. And then, as we talked about today, you want to establish ongoing opportunities for residents to heal their trauma. Those other 4 aspects will help many residents self-heal. That is to say, when they're outside the resilience growth zone, find ways to get back in it, because we're all going to be pushed outside of that. But some people are going to get stuck outside of the resilience growth zone. So we really need to focus on establishing ongoing healing opportunities. And there's a great article on restorative circles. They call them a powerful tool for community healing. So I want to now just talk about, for the rest of this time we have, how do we get going, and what are the next steps? And often we don't get going, we don't begin things because we can't figure out where it will lead or what it will require of us. It's like, oh my God, I don't want to start this. This could be overwhelming. But you don't need to know all the steps or what they will lead to. You only need to know the first step, really. You need to know step 1, and then you decide when it feels right, you can take the next step for you, and so on. So you've got to start where you're at, start small, and then see how it feels and where it leads. And that, when I've talked with so many of the leaders who've organized these community-based initiatives, that's how they started. And often they take 1 step, maybe 2 steps, they get a little nervous about what this will get, and somebody else picked up the idea and ran with it. You just never know what your actions can precipitate. So it's really helpful just to start. So I'd like to just take your own time for a second, and in 1 or 2 sentences, can you write down your vision of a role you can play in building collective resilience? What can you do to begin to build community collective resilience? Just any kind of role. Maybe it's sharing this information with somebody else in your community. Maybe it's actually joining a community group. Maybe it's starting a new one. What role, small and large, can you do? And then write down the first step you can take towards your vision. And then write down ideas about how you can decide if, after you take the first step, if and how you want to take more. So let's just take just a minute or so and respond to that. It's 1 or 2 sessions. What's your vision of how you can help build community resilience? What's the first step you can take? And how you can decide after you take that first step, if and how you want to do more. And with that, I hope everybody's had time to just jot down some notes. Let's do one last breakout room to just in 2 minutes, just share your sense of your vision of what you can do, the first step you can take, and how you will decide to do more, and then just discuss what everybody said. So let's do these. Christy, if we can we do it in groups of 3 so people have more time?
All right.
So is everybody back?
Yep, everyone's back.
Great. Well, good. Well, thank you. Welcome back, everybody. So let's just have a discussion now. If some of you are willing to share what you decided you think you can do or want to do, your vision, what your first step is, how you're going to make a decision as to continue. Let's just sort of share that if for those who are willing, and just sort of speak up. And Christy or Neely can unmute you if you're still muted, and let's just share. Anybody want to say anything? I just saw a hand somewhere.
Oh. Go ahead, Reb.
So I've recently joined Youth Prevention Coalition as part of their education and outreach subcommittee. And I want to share a project that I have envisioned that has this as the phase 1 of it, the work that we've done here. And these folks are well connected with resources. So I'm, because the things that we're talking about here are just as applicable to substance abuse prevention as they are to climate issues. And I'm hoping that those connections can be brought out and enhanced through this organization. So anyway, that's what I'm thinking of.
Great.
And we have a meeting this week. Thank you.
That sounds wonderful. And you know, you're absolutely right. The work, when we applied this to the climate emergency, it wasn't because organizations were already doing it. It's just that this kind of work is being applied to addiction, all kinds of addictions, ACEs, community violence, etc. It was very clear that it also applies to the climate emergency. And so many of the groups that started off just on ACEs or other are now expanding, like the North Carolina program, et cetera, and dealing with these issues. So building these kind of community coalitions, doing this kind of community work, just as Father Abernathy pointed out, you're helping with all sorts of issues in the community. It really is, and it's really going to be very, very important as the climate emergency accelerates. And even though you might not be thinking you're dealing with the climate emergency, you're dealing with addiction, or you're dealing with family abuse problems, et cetera. But those will all accelerate very likely unless we build this kind of resilience. Anybody else willing to share? Any thoughts?
I had raised my hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And I may I share?
Please do.
So it's been disabled, but so I can share. That'd be great.
Oh, you want to do a screen share?
Yeah, may I?
Sure.
Yeah, Vivian, I'm going to make you a co-host, so you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, I can see it now. Thank you. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
So this is something I was just talking with Samara about. I'm working on my PhD or DMin for my interfaith ministry. And I used to work at NIH. And it just was a coincidence that I was in this, I was installing project management software for budgeting. So, but I came across this email that said you could join the working group for religion, spirituality, and health. a working group at NIH. So I was in the inaugural meeting, and Dr. Ann Berger, a palliative care researcher, she had installed a Chartres-style labyrinth on the grounds of NIH hospital, and she's using shamanism for pain management of last resort. So my research, I decided, and I talked with her about this, that we're going to do a research project that's I'm going to be interviewing people, 17 to 30-year-olds, in my own Stokes County. It's a fossil fuel sacrifice zone that has, so it's one of the places that Dr. Nathan was talking about, our father Nathan was talking about, that has coal ash, as a the trauma that's already there in this low income community. So I'm going to be working with, this is where the connections are, Bob. The NIH Hills has this, so she's already created a palliative care research, it's 10 years of research that she's already done, but these same questions can be used. They've already been evaluated to research these 17 to 34-year-olds to develop the stressors in that community. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to try to convert, it's a palliative care research. So I'm calling it palliative care for a dying planet, which is kind of morbid. I think I need to change the name of it. But but anyway, it's these three things that you've been talking about the whole time. And that's the reason I'm taking your class. So I'm working at, I went to Duke, and I went there for their research class last summer, but this is my research that I'm going to be doing. So I've got several I've got 12 people that have, volunteered to help me with this, to help get these 17 to 34-year-olds. And I'm actually going to interview them, have them take this test, and then go from there. So that's just, it's a very small, subset, but I'm interested in measurements, right? How do you know if a community is resilient or not? And that's what my goal is. So that's what I'm doing.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. You might want to look at Father Abernathy's tools.
I was looking at all that. I was very interested in all that. I want the measures, because that's what I think we need to do. If we can see these communities that, and it's got to be a simple and an app. I'm a computer programmer. That's what I do. So, I just think that, we'll be applying for grants, etc. But I'm already working with,
Great.
people. So, yep.
Well, best of luck on this project, and share it with the group on Basecamp. We're going to keep the Basecamp project alive, program alive, so you can share that, and you might get others some comments, etc.
Cool. Thank you.
Any other comments, thoughts? Let me ask it a different way. What, for those of you who aren't sure if there's anything, what stands in the way of engaging in some way? Is anybody willing to share what are the obstacles? It could be just you're already at 150% of capacity, or whatever. Anybody just willing to share what your thoughts are about engaging in this kind of work in some form, in some small way, large way, whatever it might be? Anybody willing to share a little bit?
I'm happy to share, Bob.
Go ahead.
I feel like I have really a lot to offer, and have not been, even though I'm a good networker, visible, honestly. And so one thing I shared in the group is in my graduate course this semester, it's on facilitation, coaching, and human development. And we are in a group every week coaching one another. And I'm bringing a creative project that I want to do with nurses to that group to help coach me as I bring it to life and become more visible. So it's being aware that, I need to step into leadership more than I am. And this is one way I'm going to harness some coaching and support.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that. Anybody else feel the same way as Joyce, that you're just not a networker?
I was in the small group with Joyce, and I have like sort of the opposite relationship to that. Like my role is overly powerful. So I can't be, I can't be the obvious center of a convening that would get this done. We have a lot of the right circumstances in my community to go down this road, but I need to find somebody else and pay it, like I need to find someone like Joyce to like finance them doing this. So I felt like our small group was very helpful to me. Like, okay, now I have some hope because I really cannot be at the center of it. It won't work.
Interesting. So do you have some ideas of somebody else you can reach out to and try to?
Yeah, but they're very busy people. So I got to bide my time and approach them carefully and be ready to pay them.
Ready to pay them. Okay, great. Well, thank you. Any other thoughts, comments?
Well, I'm looking for someone to pay me to do it because as an individual clinician who's doing the, the top of the pyramid, those after the fact services that I provide to people with mental health problems, I want to get down to back to the community level. And I'm having a hard time right now. I'm doing a lot of work pro bono voluntarily to try and get these things done, but at some point it won't be sustainable for me as to do it all voluntarily. So I'm finding that's kind of a hard shift to make because I don't now, after 20 some years in private practice, I don't have the community ties. So I'm reworking that. And so my goals are to make at least send 5 emails or make 5 phone calls like a week. And if I don't do 5, that's okay too, but I'm trying to keep myself going so that, I can also make a community of support to get things going in all the directions I'd like to see. So yeah, I'd be happy to accept funding to do what we're talking about here.
Jennifer, thank you very much for that. So your sort of actions are 5 emails or phone calls a week. That's wonderful just to have that vision. And as you said, if you don't get all that done, well, that's just how it is. But that's a very powerful and inspiring kind of statement that you're going to commit yourself to try to engage other people. And then who knows, somebody might come up with funding, or it might evolve in a way. Just going back to Terry Barilla's project in Walla Walla, Washington, that she didn't know what it was going to lead to. She just started talking to people all over the community, if you might recall hearing her description. And then people got interested, more came together. She tried to facilitate the meetings, but to get them together, but people just took off on their own. And then funders came to the table on their own because they heard about it. So you never know, where this can lead. Thank you again. Other thoughts? I thought I saw somebody else raise a hand there. Christy or Neela, are you seeing any other hands? I can't see everybody up there.
I'm not seeing hands, but I did see a comment from Samra, just recognizing it's hard. It's hard because outside of grants or private investors in the United States, it can be hard to get paid for what Jennifer's talking about, even though so many people would love to do this, but there is hope. So just recognizing that funding is definitely an ongoing issue with this work.
That's why, so I'm a government funder. So that's like people like me need to be in this group.
So do you know Jennifer?
No,
Do you know Vivian?
Yeah, I do, right. So, well,
But it's on Basecamp how we can contact you, right, Lynn? Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's right. And so we were going to talk about that at the end, but you can communicate with individuals on Basecamp. You got to go to the right thing. It says send to the whole group, or it also says send to individuals, and the whole list of people will come up there that you can communicate with individually. And then if you decide you want to continue that, you can do it outside of base camp, just yourselves. But that's a way you can communicate. And we do it that way because many people don't want everyone to have their emails, just for a lot of reasons. So this is a way just to allow you to connect and do that. But what I have seen in my experience and what the research that we did sort of shows is that often it doesn't take a lot of time to start getting some funding in, because people are hungry to see this kind of approach take off, to build this kind of resilience in community, the social efficacy that comes out of it. People are just hungry for it. And so, yes, it takes some time to do the work on your own without funding to get it going. But I certainly can't guarantee it, but I would guess that if you can get it going within 6 months to maybe a year, you're likely to get a small group of funding, a little funding, and then it might build from there. So I would encourage you all to think it. And I understand that when you've got a full-time job and other things going on in your life, it's hard to do this as a volunteer, but you might find somebody else in the community who can, or go talk to some university students and see if they'll be your staff, et cetera, to try to get going. So I see from Mark, I would like to connect with somebody in BC, Canada, especially on Vancouver Island. I'm new here, so I need a bit of cultural advice. Mark, there was a bunch of people from the Neighborhood Resilience Project, Building Resilient Neighborhoods in Victoria, who were going to participate in the community practice and then ended up not being able to. But you might want to contact, I'll send you the name of the organization. I think it's Building Resilient Neighborhoods in Victoria, and they're really sad that they couldn't participate. So that might be a group to connect with.
Well,
Anybody else?
I actually spoke, I think they came to the first session and I spoke to them then. And either the last session or the one before, there was someone up in Nanaimo on Vancouver Island. And I've lost her contact as well. So that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, and I also see Stacy Barber says she's in close by, based in Victoria. So great. Any other comments, thoughts?
Rob, was your hand up earlier?
Yeah, I am particularly interested in what Reverend Abernathy said about creating baselines. And I'm wondering if maybe we could get more information from the University of Pittsburgh or him or somebody to help us with that. I think that's a critical point for us to be sustainable. If we can prove that we're doing something that's making a difference, then getting baselines and showing progress is going to be critical. Or if there are other ways, that we can learn about how to create baselines, that would be great.
Great. Yeah, we'll try to get the information that the Neighborhood Resilience Project has and post it on Basecamp. And then there's a whole bunch of others. We didn't really get into it. A whole bunch of other projects going on, research projects on how to evaluate resilience building. And we'll share some of that too. A lot of it's in the documents we sent out, but you have to go through the details of all of it. So, but yeah, it's a great important point. Any other? I see that Deb's got to go. See you, Deb. Nice to have you with us. I'd like to just close. This was a good idea by Christy. Let's just take, if you're willing, if you can just sort of share, each of you one at a time, we'll unmute yourself, in one word. How do you feel now? What was the community practice like for you? What do you want to share with the group in just one word? Just each of us doing that, if you're willing to do that. So, and just go for it. Just start and say something.
I feel encouraged. I feel like oftentimes it feels like maybe me and my small team are the only ones thinking about how to do this in a way that's going to be really impactful and authentic to individual communities. But in this space, it feels encouraging to know that there are so many of us from everywhere who are like-minded in this cause. And it just rejuvenates me to go back and keep going and do more.
Thank you, Nadine. Appreciate it.
Inspired,
Great.
deep gratitude.
Wonderful.
Challenge.
Sorry. I'm gonna-
Connect to Stacy.
Mitch, did you say
Responsi-
something?
Oh, I was going to say responsibility.
Grouping.
Thank you.
Uncertain but hopeful.
Great.
Supported,
Oh,
empowered.
lit.
Lit.
Yeah, I feel like I've been lit from the inside, or and like you said, be supported and just, held.
Enlightened with all the information that I've gained.
Inspired.
Thank you.
Ready to do it again.
Can we use Basecamp to do our own projects, or should we have our own Basecamp project? If we want to invite other people to join, et cetera, like our other team members.
Probably should then separate it out.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I created my own. Okay.
Other comments?
In chat, I'm seeing encouraged, reassured, re-energized, encouraged, and motivated.
Anybody who's not shared anything want to share? Okay. Well, let me just close by saying that, first of all, we're going to continue the Basecamp site. Again, it's going to be available to all of you, but the information's also going to be placed on the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice website, Jesse Kohler's organization. And you've already seen the link to it. I think we're going to post it again in chat. If there is sufficient interest, we will continue the community of practice next year. We did this same thing. It was a little different, and we called it a training program last year. We're going to do that again, the 8-week program, but we also want to start offering, if there's enough interest, likely starting in February, monthly 90-minute Zoom calls where you can just share your information, et cetera. We'll send out an email to everybody in January and to the people who participated last year and see if there's enough. There may only be 3 to 5 people at some sessions and 15 or 20 at other sessions. And they'll focus on just greeting, allowing people to get to know people who are working in the field and what the work they're doing, but also group discussions, share your work, share challenges, obtain information, feedback. We can also zoom in on, no pun intended, zoom in on specific topics. We want to really talk again about organizing or facilitating or funding a local coalition, policies, how to integrate climate activism with resilience building, which is always a very important topic. We wrote about it a little bit, and many other topics that are really how to work with specific groups, et cetera. So it's going to be up to the group, though. We won't have a set agenda. Likely next fall, we will have another 8-week program like this one where there is a set agenda, but this ongoing community practice will not be a set agenda. It'll be up to the participants. So look for an email sometime in next month and respond to it. If you're interested. I want to just offer some closing thoughts. So it's really evident that if we want to protect and regenerate the planet and ourselves, And I think Father Paul said this so well. We have to think systemically and respond holistically, respond within the context of those systems effects. And this requires that we all get out of our personal, our professional, and organizational silos, which is so easy to be in, to organize collaborations that build common understanding and engage people in collective action. Our individualized approaches will remain important, but we have to really scale up. And so, as we said before, always remember that if trauma can be passed down through the generations, then so can population level prevention, healing, and transformational resilience. We know how to do this. It's being done. And this is our mission, to really engage in this in whatever way you can, individually, organizationally, in your family, your network of people, et cetera. So just a little bit of information there. You can already get Transformational Resilience. It has a lot of this information in it. And Preventing and Healing Climate Trauma is a guide to building resilience and hope in communities. And the documents you got were slightly amended versions of the chapters in this book, although they've now edited so it reads better. It will be out. We thought it was going to be out in 1st of January, but it's now out in March. But it might be a helpful tool for you. So I want to ask one last thing. We're going to post the evaluation in chat, and we'll send it to you also. Please do fill out this evaluation. We're only getting about half the group filling out the evaluations, but this one will have one question about today, but it's mostly about the overall community of practice. And it's really vital to have almost everybody fill this out so we can use it to obtain future continuing ed credits and to improve these future community practices. So I really ask you to do that. And I just want to close by just giving you all a big hug and a big thank you for being with us and for your commitment to these issues and these addressing these challenges, and for all you do. So I just want to thank you all and wish you all the best in all the work you do in the coming years and months. So thank you all, and we'll see you later. Take care.
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye, y'all. From the south.
Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.